The great hall of the Galactic Assembly stretched out like a vast ocean of marble and crystal, its domed ceiling disappearing into artificial stars that twinkled with the light of 1,000 worlds. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the center of the chamber, his boots clicking against the polished floor as he approached the raised platform where the High Council sat in judgment. Behind him walked Ambassador Lisa Carter, her diplomatic uniform pressed and perfect, though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. The council members looked down at the human delegation with expressions that ranged from boredom to outright contempt. Elder Korthax of the Zephyrian Dominion lounged in his crystalline throne, his 6 arms draped lazily over the armrests while his compound eyes glittered with amusement. To his left sat Prelate Nexus Prime, whose tentacled form pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that the Universal Translator interpreted as condescension. The other council members, representatives of species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia, regarded the humans with the same attention they might give to particularly persistent insects. Supreme Counselor Vrax, ancient even by galactic standards, leaned forward on his throne of black stone. His voice echoed through the chamber like the rumble of distant thunder. The petition of the human species has been reviewed and debated extensively. We have reached our final decision regarding your request for elevation to Class 2 status. Jake felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. Beside him, Lisa straightened her shoulders and prepared to hear what they both suspected was coming. They had spent 3 years preparing this petition, gathering evidence of humanity's contributions to the Assembly, documenting their technological innovations and military achievements. 3 years of hope that had slowly curdled into resignation. The Council finds that while humanity has shown admirable enthusiasm in their service to the Assembly, they lack the maturity and wisdom necessary for higher classification, Vrax continued, his words falling like hammer blows. Furthermore, recent human activities have demonstrated a concerning tendency toward independent action that runs counter to Assembly protocols. Elder Korthax's laugh sounded like breaking glass. The humans think 50 years of service entitles them to equality with species that have guided the galaxy for millennia. How amusing. His compound eyes fixed on Jake with predatory intensity. Your children playing at being adults, and children must be supervised. Lisa stepped forward, her diplomatic training overriding her personal feelings. Honored Council. Humanity has served faithfully in every capacity requested. We have provided peacekeeping forces for 17 conflicts, contributed to the defense of 43 worlds, and our scientists have made breakthrough discoveries in quantum mechanics, biological engineering, and faster-than-light communication. Surely this demonstrates our readiness for greater responsibility. Prelate Nexus Prime's tentacles writhed in what the translator rendered as dismissive laughter. Discoveries made with Assembly resources on Assembly worlds under Assembly supervision. You contributed labor, nothing more. A tool does not receive credit for the work of its wielder. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He had spent 20 years of his life serving the Assembly, had bled for worlds whose names he could barely pronounce, had lost friends and colleagues in conflicts that weren't even humanity's to fight, and now they were being told it meant nothing. The Council's decision is final, Vrax announced, his voice cutting through the murmur of agreement from the other members. Humanity will remain classified as a Class 3 species. Your colonization rights are hereby restricted to your current 12 worlds. You are forbidden from developing weapons technology beyond Assembly-approved specifications. Your military forces will continue to serve as auxiliary support for higher-tier species as required. Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. This wasn't just a rejection of their petition. This was a prison sentence. Humanity would remain forever locked in their current position, servants to species that saw them as nothing more than useful animals. Additionally, Vrax continued, recent human activities have shown a disturbing trend toward unauthorized exploration and independent research. Effective immediately, all human scientific endeavors must be pre-approved by the Assembly Science Council. Any unauthorized research will result in immediate sanctions. Lisa's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. Honored Council, with respect, these restrictions would effectively halt human progress entirely. We would be unable to improve our own condition or contribute meaningfully to the Assembly's goals. Your contribution is to serve, Elder Korthax snapped, his multiple arms gesturing dismissively. Nothing more is required or desired. The galaxy has functioned perfectly well for thousands of years without human progress, and it will continue. To do so, Jake looked around the chamber at the faces of the council members. He saw no doubt, no sympathy, no recognition of humanity as anything more than a convenient tool. These beings had made their decision long before the humans had even entered the chamber. The petition, the evidence, the 3 years of preparation, it had all been meaningless theater. The council has spoken, Vrax declared with finality. You will return to your worlds and inform your leadership of these decisions. The Assembly expects full compliance within one standard galactic cycle. For a long moment, Jake stood motionless in the center of the great hall. The weight of the decision settled on his shoulders like a crushing burden. 50 years of service, of sacrifice, of hope, all reduced to nothing by beings who saw humanity as inherently lesser. Then something shifted inside him. The cold feeling in his chest spread outward, filling his limbs with a strange calm. He looked up at the council members with eyes that no longer held any trace of deference or respect. You have given us your answer, Jake said, his voice carrying clearly across the vast chamber. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Lisa looked at him with surprise, recognizing something in his tone she had never heard before. The diplomatic protocols they had followed for decades seemed to fall away like shed skin. Now we give you ours, Jake continued, his gaze never leaving Supreme Counselor Vrax without another word. Jake turned on his heel and began walking toward the chamber's exit. His footsteps echoed in the sudden silence like the beating of a drum. Lisa hesitated for only a moment before following, her own footsteps joining his in a rhythm that seemed to grow louder with each step. The council members watched in stunned silence as the human delegation walked away. No species had ever simply left a council session without being dismissed. The breach of protocol was so unprecedented that none of them immediately knew how to respond. Elder Korthax recovered first, his laughter filling the chamber. Let them leave. They'll come crawling back within a cycle, begging for forgiveness and promising to be good little servants. But Supreme Counselor Vrax did not laugh. His ancient eyes followed the retreating figures until they disappeared through the chamber's massive doors. Something in the human commander's voice had stirred a memory, a warning from the deep past about the danger of pushing any species too far. For the first time in centuries, Vrax felt the cold touch of fear. Captain Alex Turner stood on the bridge of the UES horizon, watching the steady stream of human ships departing from the orbital station around Kepler Prime. The evacuation had been going on for 2 weeks now, and still the lines of vessels stretched from the planet's surface to the edge of the system. Every human citizen, every piece of equipment, every scrap of knowledge that belonged to humanity was being carefully loaded and prepared for the journey home. The decision had come down from Earth within hours of Jake Morrison's return from the Assembly. President Marcus Webb had called an emergency session of the United Earth Council, and the vote had been unanimous. If the Assembly wanted to treat humanity as servants, then humanity would no longer serve. Sir, we're receiving another transmission from the station commander, reported Lieutenant Ben Hayes from the communications station. He's demanding we leave behind all Assembly-derived technology. Alex smiled grimly as he watched a massive cargo hauler disconnect from the station's docking bay. Tell Commander Vex that we're taking what's ours. If he has a problem with that, he can file a complaint with the Assembly. The Nexari station commander had been growing increasingly agitated as the evacuation continued. What had started as smug satisfaction at humanity's departure had quickly turned to concern as the aliens realized just how much of their infrastructure depended on human innovation and maintenance. The life support systems, the quantum communication arrays, the defensive shields all had been designed or improved by human engineers over the past 5 decades. Dr. Rachel Goldman hurried onto the bridge, her arms full of data tablets and storage devices. As head of the Colonial Sciences Division, she had been working non-stop to catalog every piece of human knowledge and innovation. "Captain, we've finished downloading the research files from the xenobiology lab. The Nexari tried to lock us out, but our people had backup access codes." Alex nodded approvingly. "Good work, Doctor. How much more do we need to evacuate?" "Most of the civilian population is already aboard the transport ships," Rachel replied, consulting her tablet. "We're just finishing up with the scientific equipment and the military installations. Another 3 days should do it." Through the bridge viewports, Alex could see the sprawling orbital station that had been humanity's home away from home for decades. Thousands of humans had lived and worked there, contributing to the Assembly's goals while slowly learning the secrets of galactic civilization. Now it would be empty, just another monument to the Assembly's short-sightedness. "Captain," called out Ensign Kate Phillips from the sensor station, "I'm detecting Nexari military vessels approaching from the inner system, 3 heavy cruisers and a command ship." Alex's expression hardened. "Are they taking an intercept course?" "No, sir, they're maintaining a respectful distance, but they're definitely watching us." The Nexari had been growing nervous as the evacuation progressed. Commander Vex had initially been pleased to see the humans leave, but his attitude had changed as he realized what humanity's departure would mean for the station's operations. The humans hadn't just been workers, they had been the invisible backbone that kept everything functioning. Down in the cargo bay, Colonel Sarah Blake supervised the loading of the last military equipment. Her soldiers worked with quiet efficiency, their faces showing none of the emotion they felt at leaving the world they had called home. These were professional soldiers, trained to follow orders without question, but Sarah could see the anger burning in their eyes. "Colonel," called out Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, "the Nexari are trying to claim ownership of the defensive satellite network. They're saying it was built with Assembly resources." Sarah's laugh was cold and bitter. Those satellites were designed by human engineers, built by human workers, and maintained by human technicians. The Assembly provided the raw materials. Nothing more. She gestured to her soldiers. "Strip them down. If they want satellites, they can build their own." The defensive satellites had been one of humanity's greatest contributions to the Assembly's security. The quantum-linked network could detect threats across entire star systems and coordinate responses in real time, without human maintenance. The system would fail within months. Captain Turner received another transmission from the planet's surface. Colonel Blake's voice crackled through the comm system. "Captain, we're ready for final departure from the surface installations. The Nexari are demanding we leave behind all technical manuals and maintenance protocols." "Denied," Alex replied immediately. "That knowledge belongs to the people who developed it. If the Assembly wants to maintain their equipment, they can. Figure it out themselves." The irony wasn't lost on him. For 50 years, the Assembly had treated human innovations as their own property, claiming credit for discoveries made by human scientists and engineers. Now they were learning the difference between owning something and actually understanding it. Dr. Goldman returned to the bridge with a grim expression. "Captain, I've been analyzing the Assembly's technological base. Without human contributions, they're going to face serious problems. Our people developed the quantum communication protocols, the advanced medical systems, the food production networks, the list goes on." Alex studied the data on his command screen. The humans had been busy during their time in the Assembly, quietly improving and innovating while the alien leadership took credit for their work. How long before their systems start failing? "Some of the more complex systems will begin showing problems within weeks," Rachel replied. "The quantum communication network will probably last 6 months before it becomes unreliable. The medical systems might hold out for a year, but without human maintenance, they'll eventually break down completely." The evacuation continued for another 2 days. Ship after ship departed the system, carrying tens of thousands of humans back to Earth or to the outer colonies. The Assembly had expected humanity to leave quietly, taking nothing with them but the clothes on their backs. Instead, they were conducting the largest peaceful migration in galactic history, taking with them decades of accumulated knowledge and expertise. On the final day, Alex stood on the bridge as the last transport ships prepared to depart. The orbital station looked strangely empty now, its corridors dark and silent. The Nexari had moved their own people in to take over essential functions, but they were already struggling with systems they didn't fully understand. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Hayes, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Assembly Command. They're ordering us to return and resume our duties." Alex's smile was cold. "Tell them we resigned. As of today, humanity is no longer available for assembly service." The UES Horizon was the last human ship to leave the system. As it jumped to hyperspace, Alex looked back at the station one final time. The Nexari thought they were getting rid of a problem. Instead, they had just created a much bigger one. The galaxy was about to learn what it was like without humanity's steady hand holding it together. And for the first time in his career, Alex Turner was looking forward to watching it all fall apart. The silence stretched across the galaxy like a spreading disease, touching every corner of assembly space with its cold fingers. 1 year had passed since the last human ship had vanished into the void, and the effects were becoming impossible to ignore. Trade routes that had hummed with activity for decades now lay empty and dangerous. Border conflicts that human peacekeepers had kept in check for generations were exploding into full-scale wars. President Marcus Webb stood before the United Earth Council in the hidden colony of Haven's Rest, his weathered face reflecting the weight of the decision that had changed everything. The council chamber was carved from living rock, deep beneath the surface of a world that didn't appear on any assembly star chart. Around him sat the leaders of humanity's scattered colonies, men and women who had committed their species to a path of independence that could not be undone. "The reports from our intelligence networks are coming in," Marcus began, his voice echoing in the stone chamber. "The assembly is falling apart faster than we expected. The Krillian rebellion has spread to 3 more sectors. The Void Plague is moving unchecked through the outer territories. Pirate raids have increased by 400% in the past 6 months. Intelligence Officer Nina Foster stood to address the council, her uniform bearing the insignia of the new human intelligence service. "Mr. President, our agents report that assembly worlds are requesting emergency aid packages at unprecedented rates. The quantum communication network is failing across 12 sectors. Medical facilities are shutting down due to equipment failures. Food production on 17 worlds has dropped to critical levels," Marcus nodded grimly. The assembly had built their civilization on the backs of others, taking credit for innovations while never truly understanding the systems they claimed to control. Now they were learning the hard way that there was a difference between owning something and knowing how to fix it when it broke. "What about their attempts to find us?" asked Governor Sarah Mitchell from the Outer Rim colonies. Nina's expression grew darker. "They've sent search fleets to over 200 systems. All have returned empty-handed. Our new stealth technology is working perfectly. As far as the assembly knows, humanity has simply vanished from the galaxy." The truth was both simpler and more complex than the assembly could imagine. Humanity hadn't fled to distant galaxies or hidden in unexplored space. They had simply learned to become invisible, using technologies that the assembly had never bothered to develop. Why create stealth systems when you could simply demand that others serve you openly? On the industrial world of New Prometheus, Dr. Emma Rodriguez worked feverishly in her laboratory, surrounded by equipment that would have been impossible under assembly restrictions. The quantum field generators hummed with power, bending space-time in ways that assembly science claimed were impossible. Without the restrictions that had held them back for 50 years, human innovation was advancing at a pace that would have terrified their former masters. "The prototype is ready for testing," Emma announced to her team. "If this works, we'll be able to communicate instantaneously across galactic distances without using the assembly's quantum network." The implications were staggering. For decades, the assembly had controlled galactic communication through their quantum network, using it to maintain their grip on power. A truly independent communication system would make humanity completely free of assembly control, Meanwhile, on the military training world of Sparta Station, General Ryan Cooper watched as the new generation of human soldiers practiced with weapons that pushed the boundaries of physics. These weren't the peacekeepers who had served the assembly for 5 decades. These were warriors trained for a galaxy that had shown its true face to humanity. The assembly still thinks we're the same species they dismissed, Ryan told his staff. Officers, they remember humans who followed orders, who accepted restrictions, who were grateful for any scraps they were thrown. They have no idea what we've become. The training exercises were unlike anything the assembly had ever seen. Human soldiers moved with precision and deadly efficiency, wielding weapons that could tear through the strongest alien defenses. They had learned from 50 years of serving other species, studying their strengths and weaknesses, memorizing their tactics and strategies back in assembly space. Supreme Counselor Vrax paced in his private chambers, his ancient form trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. The reports from across the galaxy painted a picture of collapse that grew darker with each passing day. The carefully maintained balance of power that had kept the galaxy stable for millennia was crumbling. How many more systems have requested emergency aid? He asked his aide, a nervous Nexari diplomat named Kex. 47 in the past week alone, Supreme Counselor, Kex replied, his tentacles writhing with anxiety. The outer territories are reporting complete communication blackouts. The hegemony wars are spreading faster than we can contain them, and the pirate fleets are growing bolder every day. Vrax stopped pacing and fixed his aide with a stare that could have melted steel. And still no word from the humans? None. Supreme Counselor, it's as if they've simply ceased to exist. The truth was even worse than Vrax suspected. Humanity hadn't just disappeared, they were actively avoiding contact with the assembly. Every attempt to locate human colonies met with failure. Every offer of negotiation went unanswered. The species that had once served so faithfully now treated the assembly as if it no longer existed on the frontier world of Liberty Prime. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the Planetary Defense Station, watching the stars that had once been humanity's prison. The man who had walked out of the assembly chamber a year ago was gone, replaced by someone harder and more determined. The uniform he wore now bore the insignia of the Human Defense Force, a military organization that answered to no alien authority. "Sir," called out Lieutenant Dana Price from the communication station, "we're receiving another transmission from the assembly. They're offering full diplomatic immunity and immediate elevation to Class 2 status if we'll return to negotiations." Jake's laugh was cold and bitter. "Too little, too late. Tell them we're unavailable." The offers had been coming regularly for months now, each more desperate than the last. The assembly was finally beginning to understand what they had lost, but understanding and acceptance were two different things. They still believed that humanity could be bought with promises and privileges. "Any word from the deep space monitoring stations?" Jake asked. "Yes, sir. Long-range sensors are detecting massive construction activity in the Vega sector. Whatever they're building out there, it's bigger than anything we've seen before." Jake nodded with satisfaction. The assembly thought humanity had run away to lick their wounds. They had no idea that humans were building something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The species that had once served as peacekeepers and laborers were preparing to return as something entirely different. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you pushed humanity too far. Admiral Kevin Stone stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the burning wreckage of what had once been the Assembly's most powerful battle fleet. The ships that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries now drifted as twisted metal and cooling plasma, their crews either dead or fleeing in whatever escape pods they could find. The Battle of Kepler Station had lasted less than 6 hours, but its impact would be felt across the galaxy for generations. "Sir, we're receiving multiple surrender signals from the remaining assembly vessels," reported Communications Officer Dana Price, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. "They're requesting permission to evacuate. They're wounded." Kevin's expression remained cold as stone. 5 years had passed since humanity's exodus from assembly space, and the galaxy had burned in their absence. The hegemony wars had consumed entire sectors. The void plague had claimed billions of lives. Pirate fleets had grown so bold that they attacked assembly core worlds with impunity. And through it all, the assembly had maintained their arrogant belief that they could handle any crisis without human help. "Grant them safe passage for their wounded," Kevin commanded. "But make it clear that any ship that tries to engage will be destroyed without warning." The technology that had made this victory possible would have been impossible under assembly restrictions. The U's Defiance and her sister ships were marvels of human engineering, built with knowledge that had been forbidden to them for 50 years. Their quantum shields could absorb energy attacks that would have vaporized any assembly vessel. Their weapons could punch through the strongest alien defenses like paper. Dr. Emma Rodriguez materialized on the bridge as a hologram, her image transmitted from the research station orbiting New Prometheus. "Admiral, the weapon systems performed flawlessly. The quantum disruptors completely bypassed their shield harmonics." "They never even knew what hit them," Kevin nodded with grim satisfaction. The assembly had always assumed that their technology was superior to anything humanity could develop. They had convinced themselves that human contributions were nothing more than crude labor, applied to their sophisticated designs. Now they were learning the truth about human innovation when it was freed from artificial constraints. "What's the status of the assembly's distress calls?" Kevin asked. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies," Dana replied. "Supreme Counselor Vrax is personally requesting immediate ceasefire negotiations. He's offering complete autonomy for human space and full reparations for the Exodus." Kevin's laugh was harsh and bitter. 5 years too late. Where were these generous offers when we were kneeling before their council, begging for basic recognition? The truth was that humanity no longer needed the Assembly's permission for anything. While the galaxy had torn itself apart, human colonies had thrived in the darkness between the stars. Their population had grown. Their technology had advanced beyond anything the Assembly could imagine. Most importantly, they had learned to see themselves not as servants of a greater power, but as masters of their own destiny. On the planet below, General Ryan Cooper led his forces through the ruins of Kepler Station. The orbital facility had been one of the Assembly's most important military bases, home to their advanced weapons research and strategic planning departments. Now it was a smoking ruin, its defenses swept away by weapons that its designers had never imagined possible. "Sir, we've secured the main computer core," reported Colonel Lisa Martinez, her armor scarred from the brief but intense ground battle. "The Assembly's strategic databases are intact." Ryan smiled grimly as he surveyed the devastation around him. The Assembly forces had fought bravely, but they had been using tactics and equipment that were decades out of date. Human military doctrine had evolved during the years of exile, shaped by the bitter knowledge that they could never again rely on anyone but themselves. "Upload everything to the fleet," Ryan ordered. "Every plan, every defensive position, every secret weapon they've been developing. It's time the galaxy learned that there are no secrets from humanity anymore." The data they were recovering would give human forces a complete picture of Assembly military capabilities. More importantly, it would reveal the locations of every hidden base, every secret research facility, every emergency command center that the Assembly had built during their millennia of rule back in Assembly space. Supreme Counselor Vrax sat in his emergency command center, deep beneath the surface of Nexus Prime, the reports flooding in from across the galaxy painted a picture of catastrophe that grew worse with each passing hour. Human fleets had appeared simultaneously in dozens of star systems, striking with precision and overwhelming force at targets that should have been impossible to locate. "How many sectors have fallen?" he asked his military advisor, a battle-scarred Zephyrian named Klex. 17 confirmed, Supreme Counselor," Klex replied, his multiple arms trembling with exhaustion. "The humans are moving faster than we can respond. Their ships appear out of nowhere, destroy our defenses, and vanish before reinforcements can arrive." Vrax felt the weight of his centuries pressing down on him. He had lived through the rise and fall of empires, had seen species emerge from primitiveness to galactic power. But he had never witnessed anything like this systematic dismantling. Of everything the Assembly had built, what about our allies? He asked desperately. Surely the hegemony species will unite against this human threat? Klex's expression grew even darker. The hegemony species are too busy fighting each other to coordinate any response. The Krillian rebellion has spread to their core worlds. The Nexari are dealing with massive civil unrest. The Zephyrians are requesting emergency aid just to maintain basic order in their own territories. The irony was bitter and complete. The Assembly had spent so much effort keeping their member species divided and dependent that they had forgotten how to unite against a common threat. Now that unity was exactly what they needed most, President Marcus Webb addressed the galaxy. From the bridge of the UES Liberator, humanity's newest and most powerful warship, his image was broadcast simultaneously to every world that still maintained functional communication systems, a technological feat that should have been impossible without the Assembly's quantum network. People of the galaxy, Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority of a species that had finally come into its own. For 50 years, humanity served the Assembly faithfully. We asked only for the chance to prove ourselves worthy of respect and partnership. Instead, we were treated as servants, our contributions dismissed, our potential ignored. He paused, letting his words sink in across 1,000 worlds. The Assembly chose to see us as tools rather than partners. Now they will learn the difference between a humanity that serves and a humanity that rules. The message was clear and unmistakable. The galaxy's new masters had announced themselves, and they were done asking for permission. Ambassador Carl Mitchell walked through the ruins of the great assembly hall, his footsteps echoing in the vast chamber that had once hosted the rulers of the galaxy. The magnificent dome ceiling was cracked and broken, its artificial stars dark and lifeless. The crystalline thrones where the High Council had sat in judgment were shattered, their fragments scattered across the marble floor like the dreams of a dead empire. 10 years had passed since humanity's exodus from assembly. Space and the galaxy had changed beyond recognition. The mighty civilization that had ruled for millennia was now a shadow of its former self, its territories reduced to a handful of core worlds, its influence broken by wars that had consumed entire sectors. The Assembly still existed, but only because humanity allowed it to. Supreme Counselor Vrax sat alone in what remained of his throne, the ancient being looking older and more fragile than ever before. His once proud form was bent with age and defeat, his eyes holding the hollow look of someone who had watched everything he believed in crumble to dust. Around him sat the few surviving members of the High Council, representatives of species that had once commanded respect across the galaxy but now struggled simply to survive. "We were wrong," Vrax whispered, his voice barely audible in the empty chamber. "We didn't understand what we were losing when we let them go." Carl nodded solemnly as he approached the broken throne. Behind him walked Fleet Admiral Julie Patterson. Her uniform bearing the insignia of the Human Defense Force, her presence was both a courtesy and a reminder that humanity's military might could destroy what remained of the Assembly at any moment. The ships waiting in orbit above Nexus Prime were larger and more powerful than anything the Assembly had ever built. "You saw us as servants," Carl said quietly, his words carrying across the ruined hall. "We saw ourselves as partners. That was the fundamental problem from the very beginning." The irony was not lost on any of them. The council that had once looked down on humanity from their elevated platform now found themselves looking up at the representatives of the galaxy's new, dominant power. The species they had dismissed as primitive laborers had become the arbiters of galactic civilization. Elder Korthax, his once proud crystalline form now dim and cracked, raised his head with great effort. "What do you want from us?" he asked, his voice hollow with despair. "Haven't you taken enough?" Carl's expression remained neutral, showing neither cruelty nor sympathy. "We want what we always wanted. Recognition of what we are and what we're capable of achieving." The difference is that now we no longer need your permission to exist. The transformation of the galaxy had been swift and merciless. Human fleets had swept through assembly space like a cleansing fire, dismantling military installations, liberating oppressed species, and establishing a new order based on merit rather than ancient privilege. The species that had once ruled through fear and tradition found themselves facing opponents who understood both their strengths and their weaknesses better than they understood themselves. President Helen Davis addressed the galaxy from the bridge of the UES Constitution, humanity's flagship and a symbol of their new role as galactic leaders. Her words were broadcast to every inhabited world, carried by communication networks that surpassed anything the Assembly had ever created. Citizens of the galaxy, Helen began, her voice calm but filled with authority that no one could question. The old order is dead. For too long, this galaxy has been ruled by those who believe that age and tradition gave them the right to oppress. Others, that time is over. She paused, looking directly into the camera that would carry her image to billions of beings across thousands of worlds. We offer you a choice. Join us as equals in building a new civilization based on cooperation and mutual respect, or face the future alone. But understand this clearly: humanity will never again kneel before any council, any empire, or any power that sees us as less than what we are. The message was received in silence across the galaxy. Species that had spent centuries as vassals of the Assembly now found themselves being offered true partnership by their former fellow servants. The contrast was stark and unmistakable. On the industrial world of New Terra, Dr. Emma Rodriguez stood before a gathering of the galaxy's greatest. Scientists representing dozens of species that had once been forbidden from sharing their knowledge freely. The Assembly's rigid hierarchies had stifled innovation for millennia, preventing collaboration between species based on arbitrary classifications of superiority and inferiority. The old restrictions are gone, Emma announced to the assembled. Researchers, no more forbidden technologies. No more classified research. No more barriers between species who want to learn from each other. We're going to build something better than what came before. The scientists in the audience looked at each other with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. For the first time in galactic history, they would be free to pursue knowledge without the Assembly's arbitrary limitations. The potential for advancement was staggering. Back in the ruined Assembly Hall, Carl Mitchell offered Vrax a data tablet containing the terms of humanity's final offer. You can continue to exist as a cultural and historical organization, he explained. Your people will be protected and provided for, but your days of ruling others are over forever. Vrax accepted the tablet with trembling hands, his ancient eyes scanning the terms that would formally end the Assembly's political power. And if we refuse? Carl's expression didn't change, but Admiral Patterson stepped forward slightly, her hand resting casually on her sidearm. Then you'll discover what the galaxy looks like when humanity stops being patient. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Humanity had tried diplomacy, had offered partnership, had even attempted to work within the Assembly's corrupt system. All of those approaches had failed because the Assembly couldn't see past their own arrogance. Now there was only one option left. We were fools, Vrax said finally, his voice heavy with regret. We thought we were superior because we were older, because we had ruled longer. We never understood that superiority comes from what you can do, not from what you've done, Carl nodded slowly. That's the lesson the galaxy is learning now. Humanity spent 50 years proving our worth to people who were determined not to see it. We won't make that mistake again. The old council member signed the document with a shaking hand, formally ending the Assembly's reign over galactic civilization. As he did, Carl couldn't help but think about how different things might have been if the Assembly had simply chosen to treat humanity as equals from the beginning, but it was too late for regrets now. The Council had made their choice 10 years ago when they dismissed humanity's petition for recognition. Now they would live with the consequences of that decision for whatever time remained to them. The galaxy belonged to humanity now, and they intended to build something worthy of that responsibility.